Okay, welcome to the Town of Chatham Historical Commission meeting on February 15th, 2022. I'm Bob Lear, I'm the vice chair, and in Mr. Messina's absence due to some surgery, I will be chairing the meeting today and starting out with the standard speech, so bear with me for a minute or two. This meeting is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. If anyone else is recording the meeting, please notify the chairman. Pursuant to Governor Baker's June 16, 2021 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of his March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law 30A, Section 20, until April 1, 2022, this meeting of the Chatham Historical Commission is being conducted via remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling the phone number at 508-945-4410, conference ID 66812-586 hashtag, or by joining the online meeting via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access. We'll post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. First item is a roll call. Please let me know if you're here. Mr. Messina is not here. I'm here. Steve Burlingame.
Here.
Ben Smoletsky.
Here.
Stephanie Hamilton.
Here.
Jane Moffett.
Here.
Don Aikman.
Here.
And Janet Tennyson.
Here.
And Sandy Porter is also absent. First order of business is the minutes, and then we have a couple of new business items and very little old business and chairman's report. So we should be pretty efficient today. Did everyone see the minutes and have a chance to review them? And have any comments? Any motions?
I move we approve the minutes of the meeting of the last meeting.
February 1st.
That's it.
Second.
All right. Don, second. I have to do another roll call. I approve. Steve, vote.
Approve.
Ben,
Yes.
Stephanie,
Can't vote.
right. Jane,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Janet.
Yes.
Okay, unanimous. All right, first order of regular business is another round of the proposed historic preservation incentive bylaw. Shortly before the presentation to the select board, we got comments from town council with a number of suggested comments / revisions. I think there's some of each in there. And in order to provide the appropriate documentation to the planning board, which is the next step here, this commission has to review those suggestions and determine which to incorporate in our proposal for the proposed bylaw. So that's what we're doing today. That information came in your packet, both the bylaw and a redlined or red edited version of town council's commentary. And with that brief introduction, Ally, you want to just tell us what we should be doing here?
Sure. I'll share my screen so we can all see the changes that town council had proposed. Again, Bob, I think you did a great job introducing it. These are just town council's recommendations. The commission does not have to take all of the recommendations. We should review each one to see if we want to incorporate some of the language that he proposes into the bylaw. But it's my goal of the meeting today is for the commission to discuss the proposed changes that town council has made in its entirety to make a recommendation to the planning board on revised language so that it can be included during the public hearing process. So if we can go through each kind of paragraph, if it's okay with the commission and the chair, vice chair, sorry.
Sure, I would, I guess, parenthetically state at the beginning, I think most of these changes are semantic, if you will, not substantive. They're adding some verbiage to, I think, in my thinking, to sort of plug any potential loopholes, not to add any additional conditions or requirements. Having said that, I think in the first section, the first paragraph, which is the purpose one, Mr. Costello has added architecturally significant in a number of areas. And to my thinking anyway, our jurisdiction deals with historically significant, not necessarily architecturally. Now, you will note down below that a building can be historically significant because of its architecture, but cannot be independently historic just because of its architecture. So I'm not sure whether we want to just point that out to the planning board or request that a number of those architecturally words come out of that first purpose. And also, which I think makes a difference, sometimes it says historically or architecturally significant, and other times it says and architecturally significant. So I'm not sure where that leaves us, except it leaves me confused. So any thoughts on that finding? And that's really the only one I'm going to complain about. So just so you know.
I agree with Bob. Generally, the comments are more semantic. Reminds me when I first started practicing, and I had a partner who was reviewing whatever I wrote, and he changed virtually everything I wrote with no changes at all except for the words that he chose. I never liked that. Never forgot it. And I think that's a lot of the case in this situation. But certainly that architectural language is probably inappropriate. I think I would send it back to the quickly back to the council and suggest to him that architecture is not a consideration of ours, one way or the other. I mean, the building could be
Historic.
architecturally insignificant and still be historic, and vice versa. So I think it's confusing to have that language, that word architecturally, or the phrase architecturally significant in the bylaw. And I would suggest that we amend its exclusion.
I'm showing 3 people. It tells me 3 people are raising their hands, but I can't tell who.
I'm raising my hand, Steph. I have my hand
Dean,
up.
I'll give Dean professional courtesy here. Dean?
Thank you. Yeah, I did raise my hand. I wasn't planning to say anything, but I think, and I wasn't involved in town council's revisions, but I think he probably picked up the word architectural from the language that was already in there in the second line where it's in the black. It says of historical or architectural significance. I assume that's what was presented to him, and that's probably why he picked that up. So if you have a concern about architectural, you might want to eliminate it in the, you've got to bring it back up to paragraph 1, Ellie. Yeah, it's in the second line, you see, right in the middle. So he may have picked it up from there.
Right, that's right. Then the other ones are where he added it. I see what you mean, Dean.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's all. Thank you.
Okay. Am I up? Is
Go
Stephanie up?
ahead, you're talking. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. The only thing that I can see which would be problematic, that if a building would be considered architecturally significant, but doesn't fall under the 70-year covenant that we have. In other words, if IMP designed, example, IMP designed a building 30 years ago, you might consider it architecturally and historically significant, but it's not 70 years old. So I don't know how you get architectural and historic together without if it falls out of the 70-year or 70 or 75-year, wherever we are now, detail. So that'd be my only thought about that.
Well, Ben, that's similar to what I was trying to hypothesize about a situation. We don't really have jurisdiction if it's not 75 years old, and yet it could still be a building under this, still be a building eligible for this treatment. There's a house, in my mind, there's a house down by the beach club, down below the beach club, which is an interesting, modernistic, it might qualify as being architecturally significant, but it's certainly not 75 years old. And that could create that sort of a situation. So, but that's not the business we're in, because it's not 75 years old. So it's more than hypothetical. There's potential for it. Somebody wanting their building to be qualified as eligible, even though the Historic Commission wouldn't otherwise be able to opine on it. Stephanie, you had your hand up for.
Yeah, I just, the whole thing I find not as friendly as Ally's. If the public is reading, I'm not a lawyer. If the public is reading this, I think they need a gentler reading than the lawyers.
Well, unfortunately, you're stuck with the lawyers. You're not gonna.
Are we though? Are we? We have to go by the lawyers. We can't go by Ally's.
At your risk, I guess. It doesn't matter what Steve or I say, but he is town council, and if that's what he says is required, then that's going to govern us. Jane, you got your hand up too.
I have my hand up too. It's Jane.
Yeah.
Ally knows about my concern. And this goes back to the CPC also, Community Preservation Committee. And I mentioned that Debbie Aikman and I have been working on historic preservation restrictions and what is the law for Chatham since 2012. And we never got a definition of it. I am concerned about the last paragraph, there conditions to be imposed and the requirement that the owner shall record at the Barnstable County Register of Deeds. Because I think, much as I love historic preservation and saving buildings, I'm afraid that's going to discourage anybody from using or taking advantage of the zoning incentive bylaw. And as an example of this, which I gave the last time, the John Hawes house at the Round near Missouri's gas station, he was going to preserve that, open it to the public for guided tours. When he heard about the historic preservation restriction, he withdrew his application. And I know several people
afraid he couldn't sell it.
that, have restored their antique houses. I know one very well who would never agree to putting on a historic preservation restriction. And I see that Mr. Costello has written a paragraph about it next to it. And he is concerned about, it sounds to me like, whether or not the person, if the property has changed hands, whether or not the person would ever be able to sell it. That's my comment.
I agree with you, Jane. I agree.
Well, you're on CPC now, and I was on it for 10 years, and we had situations like that. I mean, all the buildings that receive money from CPC are supposed to have historic preservation restriction. And Mr. Costello opined that unless we bought the property, like the Scout Hall or the Atwood House, they couldn't be forced to have a restriction on them.
Good point, Jane. I think that is something that ought to be discussed as part of the public hearing before the planning board, certainly.
I have no idea. I've been working on this thing with you guys for at least 3 years, and I never remember seeing anything about historic preservation restrictions until December. So in my opinion, it got tacked on at the last minute. And I don't know how that happened.
Well, I think it was there before, but that there was a more onerous port rendition of it previously, and this has been toned down. Ally, is that correct? Sort of.
Yes, that is correct. It's been in there since the beginning when we had discussed this, but we did have discussions about should we make a historic preservation restriction go to Mass Historic for approval? And we talked to Sarah Korjeff from the Cape Cod Commission, and she felt in discussions with us that this could potentially be an easier route, just recording a historic preservation with the Registry of Deeds instead of going through the onerous process of going to Mass Historic to get it approved. So we thought that this was a compromise at the time for we're giving incentives away through variations of dimensional requirements. So we should have some sort of get something back to say we are, saying that this structure needs to be preserved. And so that was kind of the trade-off that we were, that we felt could work well for this. So that was kind of how we got there. I do understand your concern and I hear your concern. I'm not sure how the commission wants to proceed though with that, but we had discussed this from the very beginning. And I did want to just talk quickly, if that's okay with you, Mr. Lear, about the preservation restriction section, the first part, and what Pat had opined in that section. I did speak with him further about that part specifically, and he was concerned not so much with the preservation restriction, but he was concerned that if the special permit granting authority, the Zoning Board of Appeals, gives approval for this permit to allow dimensional variations, he was concerned that potentially the Zoning Board of Appeals gives approval, but then the Historical Commission at some point down the line would say, hey, if you're doing some sort of change to the structure, you have to go back to the special permit granting authority. That's the process we have internally anyway, obviously, but he was concerned about having another board be able to discuss an approved special permit and say you need to make changes to the special permit that was approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals. So that was his concern about that section. He didn't opine on the preservation restriction. He didn't, make changes to the wording as the commission has discussed, but he didn't opine on that specific section. For the legality of.
Can I just think that you got to give a little to get a little. And if we're going to allow changes in dimensions and so on and so forth, that we should have some kind of restriction. And if it's part of the property in the deed, then it's got to be recorded somewhere. I think one of our big problems in the past is these people get CPC money, et cetera, and then they just ignore the whole thing. And we are giving up something here, and we should get something in return. So that's me.
Well, let me just backtrack a little bit. Ally tried to start us off by going through this paragraph by paragraph, and we've digressed a bit. I at least started with the first paragraph, but my thinking is, at least with regard, let's go back to that, do we have a consensus that we should ask town council to reconsider or take out those three, I guess, references to architecturally significant in the first paragraph?
I would agree.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So Ally,
Yes.
you got that? Obviously, you're taking them out right now.
I have another suggestion for the first paragraph.
Okay, Steph.
I wouldn't put Zoning Board of Appeals as ZBA yet, because not everybody realizes that ZBA is the Zoning Board of Appeals. Later on, it could be called the ZBA, but it needs to be mentioned once in the full writing.
I think you're right. One of the things that Mr. Costello did was shifted away from SPGA, which I think nobody really understood, and starting out with the Zoning Board of Appeals, but there may need to be an additional sentence added about that is the, let's see. Well, it
All
does
right.
say authority to issue, it is the special permit granting authority, if you will. So that we're clear on what's happening there.
Mhm.
I do believe that we do say zoning board of appeals. If you could see my highlighted section right here, he does say
Yeah.
zoning board of appeals and then in parentheses, in quotes, ZBA. So he does state what the ZBA, the
Right,
full,
but the authority, well, okay, the authority to issue a special permit. If you said grant a special permit, that might make it more semantically consistent, but I don't know. No, there may be some confusion. I think you're right, Steph, that
Mm.
sort of flipping the terms around. We've been looking at SPGA for these many months, and all of a sudden it's ZBA. Okay, I think were we done with purpose?
I believe
Yeah.
so, unless there's any other.
Okay. Applicability, that seems pretty clear. Although, again, Mr. Costello has added some verbiage to make it a little bit more precise or broader. One of the things I mentioned to Ally earlier today is that this definition of eligible building does not start off with must be 75 years or more old. And I don't know that it needs to be there. It might make it clearer that we're not adding anything to our jurisdiction, because scroll down a little bit, Ally. Down a little bit further, it's where our jurisdiction is, so that we're not allowed to say that a building is historically significant unless it is 75 or more years older, but it could lead potentially to some conundrum there where you go down this trail, as Ben has mentioned earlier, and find out that you don't have something that's 75 years old, therefore that's not really it. But it's in there indirectly. Perhaps it ought to be included up front, but you can give some consideration to that.
Mr. Lear?
Ma'am.
Thank you. So I know we had discussed this also offline, but if you do put 75 years specifically in the statute, the bylaw lasts for many, many years potentially. And so if for some reason you were going to change your definition, and instead of having 75 years, you have 100 years or 70 years or 50 years, whatever you change, it could change it to in the future. This gives it the leeway I think that it might need in the definition section to allow
And
that.
I think that is a reasonable rejoinder. So if somebody innocently raises that same question again, we've got a good response for leaving it the way it is. Any other, Jane, your hand is up. Yes.
Are we going to ignore Bob Oliver's letter, which had to do with,
I'm not ignoring it, but I think that is very relevant for public comment. But it is changing the ground rules of what we have already, if you will.
Right, I understand it's an addition, but as he says, he was on the historical commission. He was ahead of it also for 15 years. He's dealing with people who have large lots to begin with, and additional buildable land he's highlighted. So I think he makes a good point.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but at some point we have to get something started get it to the planning board and in one sense, see how it works. If people have situations where they think they ought to be eligible and if we have created too narrow a definition, if you will, then we're going to have to make some changes. But it's sort of you got to start somewhere division, I think. Other thoughts on Mr. Oliver's points?
Bob, this is Don. I would
Yeah.
totally agree with you that he had some great ideas, but I think that's worthy of consideration for the future and not at this point.
Okay, well, let's move it along then. Special permit policy, paragraph 4. I didn't see anything controversial in that, but any other minds pick something up? Steve, did you have any problems with that?
No, I think that's pretty straightforward.
To get 2 lawyers to agree, that's, Dean hasn't said anything, but we'll see.
Watch out.
Okay, Ally, you can scroll some more. The coverage things, I think Ally has explained a number of times through her PowerPoint process. And I think I now understand them. Is there any concerns there from the commission? Hearing none. Process. Same.
Again, they're interchanging now grant for issue and findings required in order to grant the special permit. Before, I think he changed that to issue. But now he's using granting the permit as opposed to issuing the permit.
Okay.
Just a consistency comment.
The conditions which are listed below are the first 3 are what we're talking about specifically here in terms of the new part, or maybe he's changed the numbers around a little bit. No, it's the first 3 that are there. And then the others, I think, Ally, are the ones that the zoning board always are already in the zoning bylaw.
Yes, that's correct. So they're already in the zoning bylaw that the ZBA reviews already. So I would recommend that we don't change those. Did you hear me? Sorry, I think I got some
Yes.
feedback. Okay.
No, I think that would sort of be taking us beyond the scope of what we're doing here, is to change the zoning board's conditions. So I would go back to the original version that's in the bylaw now. Any other feelings on that, Steve? Does that make sense to you?
It does. Yep, I agree.
You got it. Stephanie, is that your hand that's raised?
Yes, it is. I just have a question that I'm going backwards to findings required. And it says the ZBA must finds. Isn't it a typo? The ZBA must find, no S? It must find?
Well, the S is, yeah, I think it probably should be. I think that's a
The
typo.
S is crossed out, it looks like.
It's strict.
Well, I
It
No,
guess
is-
so.
nothing to me. First
is-
line.
It is stricken. Yes, is stricken by the
Okay.
technology he's using. It's stricken.
I agree, it's stricken.
If you were to accept all these changes, that S would disappear.
Okay.
No.
That's just old eyes trying to read it. Tiny font, is what it is.
It is tiny.
Okay, Stephanie, does that answer that part for you? Steph?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I
Bob-
think, yes,
Bob, Dean, can I ask Ally a question? Ally, there was something that when this came before the select board, I had highlighted that was a discrepancy or something, and I can't remember what it was because I no longer have my copy either.
Yep.
You remember?
Yep, I think that. Oh gosh, I'd have to go back and look. I think that you are concerned with the section by the conditions to be imposed. If you give me 1 second, I can just take a look at my notes quick.
I don't remember what it was.
I think that you had said maybe I can jog your memory so I don't have to look back at my notes quickly. I think that you had said something about there was a change that was made to a section of the bylaw that you felt that may not be anticipated. The change might not be anticipated by the historical commission because of the wording that was it changed to. Is that? Josh, I'll look at my notes. I'll be right back.
I don't remember.
another minor one, on that first paragraph 1 there, it's the one part where town council did not change SPGA to ZBA. Bear with us, folks. I think this is going to be the hard part.
Sorry about that. I deep
No, it's
sixed
all right.
my notes after the select board meeting, so I don't remember what I told Ally.
Bob,
Yes.
and while we're waiting, I noticed in Mr. Costello's edition, the box to the right of the paragraph, he has used historically dash architecturally. So he's gotten both words in there. I like it.
Okay.
I like that.
I did not notice that. Now, that's not part of what he's suggesting. That's his explanation for why he suggested it.
Right, but you know, you were worried about the first paragraph. You know,
Right, no, I understand.
that's a
I don't-
solution.
We're asking him to take that out of the substance of the bylaw itself, so certainly shouldn't be part of the comment.
But I think it includes both words nicely.
Well, it does. But we're not into architecture, we're into historic.
Well, but one of the reasons why we declare something historically significant is because of the architecture of the building.
And it can be for many other reasons too, so.
Right, right.
I don't-
Like the person who lived there and, you know,
Right.
But you read it all the time when you make a motion.
I read it as part of a reason why a building that is otherwise eligible by virtue of its age becomes historically significant.
Right, so maybe 75 ought to be in there.
Well, if we put it in there, as Ali said, and next year we decide we ought to have more jurisdiction or somehow not have to get involved with all the houses from the 1950s, we might be changing that number.
Right,
And then we'd have to change this bylaw too.
I get it. I'm still concerned about requiring historic preservation restriction. That's my theme.
Well, no, I get it. I recognize that. And I think that that's you're probably not the only one. I'll put it that way. And that the public should weigh in on that at the planning board meeting.
Right,
But we got to send something to the planning board.
right.
I have my hand up.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve. I'm trying.
I
I don't
recognize
get
that
all the hands necessarily. Go ahead.
there's a number of months ago, we ran into an issue that somebody was, I think it was confusing because somebody wanted to give consideration to architecture where we saw a house that was built in the late 40s, or I think it had something to do with one of the Brandeis houses. It was relatively new construction, but it happened to be in the shape of a full cape. But it was a 1980s full cape. And people say, well, architecturally, it's right in there. Well, we have to watch out for. There's a lot of houses that are being built that are technically full capes, but they're not full capes as we generally think of them as being historical full capes. So I think it's very important to leave that architectural word out of there because it's a confusion if nothing else.
Well, I agree. Any other thoughts on this while we're waiting for Ally to return?
Bob, I
there
have my
she is.
hand up. Steph
I see
speaking.
her.
I have one question. In order to register anything at the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds, you have to go to Hyannis, is that right?
Barnstable.
To Barnstable. Okay, is there any way we can make it simpler that they don't have to go to Barnstable to register?
I don't know because I've never practiced here. I don't imagine that somebody has to show up in person, but it's possible.
I could maybe answer that question quickly. So we do require anything to be that's recorded with the registry. Obviously, you have to go and actually record in a Hyannis. It's a practice we do for our zoning board of appeals. We do it for planning boards, so people are very familiar. Agents are very familiar with the process of actually recording documents with the registry. So I could not find that section in my notes, Dean, so I'm going to have to go back and listen to the meeting. So I'm sorry.
Well, actually, I had myself muted because I went back to the February 8th Select Board meeting. I'm watching the video on my iPhone. I'm going to try to pull this up. I'm going to mute myself again, but I just wanted to offer a comment. I think there was a question about recording. Did you have to go in person to record?
Yeah, that was the question.
I've recorded in the past at various registries. You can record by mail. You can forward your document by mail as long as you accompany it with the appropriate recording fee. I think that's I don't know that they've changed that.
Thank you, Dean.
So, yeah. Let me, I'll butt in, I'll interrupt Bob when I find this comment.
Okay,
Thank
that's
you,
fine.
Dean.
I think it was quasi substantive, but I'll see what I can come up with. Okay.
So I think that takes us at least chronologically through the document. Ally, just in terms of process, we've got a couple of changes in wording that we want to communicate to the planning board. The architecturally changes to the zoning criteria. That's what I got off the top of my head. is it appropriate to include some concerns, as in the preservation restriction? And not sure about the others, but
I think that the first step would be to, if everyone agrees to these wording changes minus the architecturally significant, and then the other ones that I had also highlighted, the findings that are already existing in the bylaw, if
Right.
everyone agrees to that, I would, and also the other changes like the preservation restriction section that the town council specifically highlighted for us, I would like to maybe discuss that a little further to see if the commission would like to remove that section, because that is what he's proposing, to remove this section in its entirety. So I just wanted to hear what the commission thought about that. But if we do agree on all of the changes that's made, I would recommend that the commission vote to accept the changes with the, obviously the wording that we had discussed, and vote to make this recommendation on this wording to the planning board officially, so that the planning board during their public hearing process can look at the document and say, okay, these are the changes that were recommended by town council. The historical commission reviewed these changes, and these are the recommendations that the historic commission is bringing to us during this public hearing process. So that is kind of the process that I foresee occurring, just so everyone's on the same page. The planning board knows where the historical commission stands on these recommended changes by town council.
okay. Steve, your hand up.
Only if you're just looking for final comments, just going back to the paragraph 1 and purpose, I would change in the next to last line where they use the word to issue a special permit, change issue to grant, because grant is used throughout the rest of the document in terms of the permitting process.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think Ally is also clarifying we need to take a position on that section, the second to last paragraph right before the preservation restriction one. And I don't really have an opinion on it myself. I don't think I understand it well enough to really make an opinion. And I think, Ally, you said that's what, in a sense, happens all the time. If somebody's going to want to make a change with something that's in existence and has been approved, they're going to have to come back to the historical commission anyway.
And the zoning board of appeals as well.
Right.
So this happens internally anyway. But he has a concern that it would be an extra condition. If the zoning board of appeals did grant the relief, it would be an extra condition on that, which he's saying that it's basically allowing another board to have like a say in the actual approved special permit that was approved by the zoning board of appeals, which he felt is not legally advisable, basically. So if I could read his comment, I'll read his comments and maybe that will be helpful. So he said, Ally, I believe this would be legally problematic because it effectively conditions the special permit upon prospective future actions by another body, the historical commission. De facto, if the subject structure is a historically architecturally significant building, any future alterations or changes thereto would likely be subject to historical commission review under the commission's statutory purview and regulations. So I would question the need for such a condition. So basically saying he affirms that this already happens internally. So we probably don't need to specifically state it in the bylaw.
That is not that it's directly relevant, but my experience in dealing with the Conservation Commission and the zoning board is that something, as you say, happens not often, but regularly. So, Steve, your hands up.
I don't have a real problem with that at all. in addition to his comments, I think that the fact that if the determination, the changes are not minor, boy, what a can of worms that will open up. If minor, major, significant, insignificant, it's a lawyer's dream, I think, to for any appeal or gives you another reason to appeal if you think that the historic commission determines that changes are not minor. Boy,
So you're saying you don't mind
let me add,
deleting it?
that's correct.
Okay. Don, your hands up.
Yeah, I think the answer to my question was just accomplished. I just want to make sure that we don't eliminate the condition of having a preservation restriction put on. And as long as that eliminating that paragraph doesn't do that, then I'm fine with it.
No, actually, that first paragraph has nothing to do with a preservation restriction. I don't know why it's under number 1, but okay, we got a consensus on removing that paragraph.
If something is minor, Bob, it might just go under this administrator review that we're trying to pass. In other words, it may not even have to go to the full commission.
Well, right, it's still, the administrative review does get ratified by the full commission, so it goes to the historical commission, maybe not for a full review, but no, I get your point.
Okay, got it. I get yours, right.
Dean, are you still with us?
Bob, I'm here.
Oh, Jane, yes.
Who did you say, are you still with us?
Dean.
Oh, I'm sorry, heard the wrong
Dean
name.
was going to get back to us with a question once he had it formalized.
Okay, so while Dean's listening to the meeting, I just want to make sure. So for all of the other changes, the commission is okay with all of the other kind of wording changes.
I would entertain a motion to do that. I recognize that Jane perhaps would not agree to the preservation restriction part, and there may be some other thoughts, but we gotta get moving with something to send over to the planning board. Well,
Bob,
yes.
I don't want you to get the idea I'm against a preservation restriction. The only point that I'm trying to make is if it's in the wording and somebody is thinking of taking advantage of this historic incentive bylaw, that I'm afraid the word that requires registry, the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds, is to be a deterrent, and I don't want it to be. That's all.
Well,
Mr.
but
Lear,
that's how you do a preservation restriction, unfortunately. Otherwise, it's not going to be meaningful or legally binding.
Mr. Lear, can I just make a quick comment on that?
Of course.
Thank you. So as an example, and this may help the commission kind of understand what the planning board sometimes does when things like this come up. For the ADU bylaw, when the planning board went through that discussion, we made the commitment that in a few years we would look back at the bylaw and see what worked and what didn't, and we would make changes based upon our factual information that we received over those 2 years. So the planning board did do that, and we did make changes, or we are proposing changes to the bylaw based upon the factual documentation that we've collected over the 2 years since 2019, so over a few years. And so I would recommend the same to the commission. There are a lot of, as Mr. Oliver had pointed out in his letter, there are a lot of things that we could potentially do And Jane, as you said about the preservation restriction, we can take time to look back over a few years about what has actually come in and been approved through this potential bylaw and make changes as necessary. So if we feel that the preservation restriction doesn't work, then we can look and see maybe if that section can be revised.
Dean, you're back.
Yeah, I am, because I found a place in the select board meeting, and it has to do, I'm going to play from the recording. It only take a minute or two. But Ally, it has to do with the paragraph that deals with what happens if there is a destruction or of the premises. And yes, the one that's on the screen now. It seemed to me as I read this that it was unclear whether town council and the commission were on the same page in terms of what happens if there is a termination of the special permit rights because the building has been destroyed in a fire or whatever. And I read the commission's underlying language as meaning that the person has to bring the property back to its original state before the permit was granted. Whereas town council seems to, he uses the word prospective, any prospective use in the 5th line, whether he was simply saying, no, any future use has to be in compliance with the existing bylaw prior to the circumstances of the existing bylaw prior to its the permit having been granted. That's essentially what the issue was. And I can play this if you'd like. It only takes a minute or two to hear, what I laid out before the select board. I don't have to do that, but that's essentially the point. And I wasn't clear.
I now remember you're making that point, Dane.
Yeah, it wasn't clear to me whether town council was being more limited, or whether the commission was being more expansive in what had to be done. If the structure is destroyed, cannot be repaired or restored, so the permit rights are terminate, that's for sure. But you said that basically the property must be brought into compliance with the underlying requirements of the zoning bylaw. And he's saying prospective use or development must be honored, but he doesn't say anything about bringing the property back. Maybe it's a difference without distinction. I don't know, but that's worth a conversation with town council, Ellie. I think that's probably what you were planning to do. And if I could add one other point unrelated, it sounded like there was some conversation around the history. This has nothing to do with this issue, but the historical preservation restriction that I know Jane has a concern about. And Ally was explaining that, and I think you said it, Bob, yourself earlier in the meeting, that it's important to get something adopted. You can always make changes in the future. Well, a good example of that is the ADU bylaw, the accessory dwelling unit, which was adopted about 3 or 4 years ago. One of the considerations back then that was rejected because it was somewhat unpopular was whether to allow a summer or a seasonal property owner to put an ADU in because they're not here all the time. And the planning board, in its wisdom, after 3 years experience with this, has decided to come forward and propose that option. That was one of the bylaws that we were considering on the same night. So right. Yes, you can take a look at intervening circumstances and facts to see if in fact this might have been an impediment, but it's not that these things are carved in stone. Anyway, those are my cheap comments.
I'm trying to understand the, I guess as you are, Dean, the difference between those two potential interpretations. One would be if the building is destroyed you're, you go back, the permit incentives don't apply anymore, and what you build would have to be in the smaller footprint, if you will.
Yeah. But he will, you might have a circumstance where you already encroached within the sideline, for example, as permitted by the special permit.
Right.
Then there's destruction of another part of the building or so forth. The original draft of the bylaw says, it's hard to read it because of the strikeouts, and must bring the property into compliance with the underlying building coverage. That says to me they have to remove the piece of the building where they were permitted to do under the special permit. He seems to be saying, no, any future use of the property, any prospective use has to be in compliance. I think there has to be some sort of a clarification as to what's legally permissible and, what he means and what the board means, what the commission means. So I simply flagged this as an issue of unclarity.
I guess I agree. My concern is how we send that off to the planning board with that in there, or and with his changes in effect, or the other way. And let them decide.
Yeah, I would suggest that maybe Ally could have a conversation with town council, ask him what he means. And is he saying that the only thing that would legally stand would be the ban on the prospective use? And if he concludes that, then I would just send it over to the planning board with his, with his changes accepted.
I guess I'm wary of the commission voting on something they don't know what they're voting for.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I don't know, Ally, if you have any better suggestions, I don't know.
I'm just reading it again. I'm sorry. No, I agree. I think that that's a good suggestion. I think that I can ask town council to further elaborate on this section, but I just want to make sure I understand what the intent the commission has for this section. So,
I mean, he may simply feel that all he's doing is, as he's done with the rest of the document pretty much, is to make it, to offer a bunch of legal clarifications. In drafting clarifications. He may not feel that, he may think that, all the commission is saying here is that we'll require any future use to be subject to the underlying bylaw once the special permit is out of the way. I'm sorry, Dean. That's what he may be thinking, and therefore he's just offering some language to clarify that.
So I did speak with town council to make sure that he felt that there was no substantive changes to the bylaw. And he felt that, he said that he did not propose any of those changes. He felt that all of them were just clarifying comments.
So then his language simply is his way of offering some drafting clarification for what he believes is the intent of the commission, namely that the prohibition, the requirement for compliance with the underlying bylaw, once the special permit is out of the way, is prospective in application only. And that's something that should be sorted out with the commission here and now, I think. Sorry to complicate this, but when I read it, I wasn't quite sure how to interpret it.
Dean, does your issue have anything to do with the definition of substantial damage or full demolition without the ability to repair? Does that portion of it?
That's not what drove me, Steve. It really wasn't. I really wasn't focused on that. I just saw two versions of phrasing as to what happens once it's very hard to read this because of the strikeouts, because it says your underlying language said the owner may no longer, okay. Yeah, that'd be better, be easier.
Yeah. I'll put them up side by side.
Oh, good.
Here, just give me 1 second.
Yeah, I'll wait until you do that.
Yep. Sorry, just takes me 1 second to get it all set up.
You can shrink it.
Okay. I believe he made this a completely separate. Okay,
You have to back up to,
I think it's right here, right?
okay.
Can you see it?
So if you look at the earlier draft, the one on the right, you want to highlight the language, Shelley, on the right?
Yep.
So, in the event of damage, loss, or full demolition of the historic structure. So, I suppose damage could be less than full demolition, such that the historic structure cannot be repaired. The owner may no longer take advantage of the lot coverage incentive or setback flexibility incentive allowed under this bylaw and must bring the property into compliance with the underlying district's building coverage and setback requirements as specified in the bylaw. So I look at that and I say, okay, if he, when he got his special permit, was allowed to extend into the setback or to put more coverage on the lot. What this says is if you can't repair the historic structure, he's got to remove his encroachments. I think that's what you mean. If you go over onto the left, it says that the lot coverage incentive and setback flexibility incentives allowed under this bylaw shall terminate. And any prospective use or development of the subject property must comply. Well, maybe he does mean the same thing because of the first phrase. When he says the lot coverage incentive and or setback flexibility incentives allowed under this bylaw shall terminate. Maybe that means you've got to remove. Maybe he is saying the same thing. I was driven by the.
He really emphasizes the prospective use. I think the original language said that you just got to bring it back into compliance. You got to rebuild the property because it may no longer take advantage and must bring the property into compliance.
Because you no longer, yeah,
that's different.
Because you no longer have an historic building on the property. It's been just
correct. Right.
So maybe he means the same thing. Maybe it's just a quick call to him to clarify because of his prior clause, which says the lot coverage incentive and or setback flexibility incentives allowed under this bylaw shall terminate. So that, I guess if you have that, he doesn't explicitly say remove things, but maybe that's, I guess that's what he does mean. Maybe my concern is misplaced.
Is there also a trigger at this point about releasing the restrictive covenant that's been recorded in the land records?
Hmm. Now, that's another issue.
That should, I mean, that's, if we're going to expect the owner to build something in compliance, then there was no, it's really gonna foul things up if that preservation restriction is still on record.
Well, I would assume that's something that the planning board could add in. Can't they, Ally? I mean, they haven't advertised anything yet, have they? Or have you? I think you have, actually.
We have advertised it, but I just did want to point out, and we had discussed this in the past, in the preservation restriction, in a sample that I provided to the board that Sarah Korjeff gave us, they do talk about maintenance and enforcement if for some reason so it says in the event of dispute here under or a claim of violation of the provisions of this agreement, either party in writing shall notify the matter disputed. Such notice shall include a proposal as to how this matter be resolved. So it does have an enforcement section, but there's also a maintenance section that says owner agrees at all times to maintain at owner's expense the premises in good and sound state of repair to prevent the deterioration of protected features. So in the historic preservation in itself, it does require that the property is, brought up and maintained. And like I said, there is an enforcement section here in the preservation restriction. So I think that this is kind of an addition to whatever restriction is placed upon the property at the Registry of Deeds. So I don't know if I've just
What
confused.
Steve was asking, Ally, I think is I'm sorry, I'm a liaison. I'm not supposed to be arguing here. But I think what I heard Steve ask is whether if you have this circumstance of the termination and you've got a preservation restriction on record, there ought to be some mechanism in the bylaw to remove that restriction. That's what I think I heard Steve say. But let me just take it a step further. So what has been advertised? You're advertising now. The notice is much narrower than previously, but the notice refers the reader, the citizenry, to what? To the commission's original draft or to town council's draft?
To the commission's original draft. So you are correct. We did go to the select board to originally, in the past, our procedure had always been to notice the entire proposed bylaw in the legal notices, but that's become quite costly over time. I don't want to go into the whole thing, but so now we are, which is in accordance with Mass General Law, now we are noticing just a brief description of what the proposed is, and we do lead the person who's reading the legal notice to the planning board's webpage, and it has the entire proposed bylaw on the planning board's webpage. So, and it's not town council's version, it is the original version, because that's technically what the historical commission had voted to recommend to the select board to send to the planning board. And I went through this specifically with town council, and he felt that it was appropriate to reference the original proposal from the historic commission before his comments were considered. So he felt very comfortable with that process. And in the process that the historical commission, subsequent to the select board reviewing it, could review his comments. He reiterated to me that these were his comments, his recommendations, but not all of them, if the historical commission did not agree, these were just his comments. The commission could take them or leave them, make recommendations as they saw fit. And so that was the process that, we had intended to follow, and that's why we're here today.
So the planning board, just for the board's understanding, that those members who are not attorneys, I guess, or the town plan. The the planning board, when they have their hearing, that it's already been scheduled, it's already been noticed, have to stay within the confines of what they noticed to the public, which is your original draft. They can, however, take into account any changes or suggestions that the commission might want to bring to the planning board's attention in a separate communication, derived from what the town council has suggested in his multiple edits. I would submit, and I'm not town council, so I have no authority to say this other than as I'm just saying it as a lawyer. From my background as a lawyer, I would think that the issue of whether a preservation restriction should be removed in the instance of the termination of a special permit because there's been a destruction or demolition of the building. I think that's probably something the planning board could attach to their recommendation to town meeting, because I think it's within the same subject matter as a preservation as imposing reservation restriction. Now, I would defer to town council if he agrees or doesn't agree with that, but I would think that's probably true. I don't know if Ally, if you have any comment on that, you're the town planner, but so anyway, it looks like this bylaw, as you drafted it, as the commission, as you submitted it to the select board, is what was advertised. That's in front of the planning board. Any additional changes or clarifications or requests for clarification or historic preservation removal provisions, I think you're free to suggest them to the planning board. And if they feel it's within the confines of their original notice, and they would probably defer to town council on that point, then that's fine. So end of story. I don't think you need to make any change today then, therefore, on this paragraph, but you can think about it. When is your hearing?
The 7th of March.
Okay, so you've got time.
Yep.
Thank you. Sorry.
Well,
I'm taking
just-
so long.
Dean, if I can clarify, then that this is, it may be given more weight because it's coming from the historical commission, but it's no different than any other public comment made to the planning board as to concerns from a member of the public, Mr. Oliver's concerns, for example.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So group, we're back to what do we send to the planning board now? They've got Ally's original version now. The question is whether to send them this revised version, although there doesn't seem to be great clarity on what difference it makes. I don't like to provide some expert leadership here, but I'd go with the original version, I think. But we can consider that. Steve, any thoughts while we're talking about lawyers?
I think there are a few things that we've talked about are significant or somewhat because they've been missed by somebody somewhere, like the fact that the restriction that has been filed with the Registry of Deeds should in fact be released once this termination has happened pursuant to section 2 or whatever we're looking at currently. And that we ought to, the things that we've talked about, perhaps we should send the original, as you say, to the commission, to the planning commission, but at the same time, we should probably delineate our comments and suggestions regarding it. I, for one, would do that at a planning commission hearing. Unfortunately, I'm going to be gone and I won't be able to attend, but I think that we've pointed out some significant concerns or changes, and they ought to be somehow presented to the planning commission.
Ally,
I mean,
comment?
this is our proposal.
So I just wanted to make a comment on the termination of the preservation restriction if there is a loss of the property. So I'm sure that this happens if there is a preservation restriction on historic properties now and there is a fire or something and the the entire structure has been burned to the ground and no longer exists. The preservation restriction still is on file at the Registry of Deeds, I would assume. So there probably is already a mechanism to say basically it no longer exists because the structure itself no longer exists because it's been, there's a fire, it's no longer there. So I think that this probably already exists somewhere, to play devil's advocate. So to put it, I'm wondering if there is a preservation restriction that is placed on a historic structure. This historic structure no longer exists because of a fire. Is there still really a preservation restriction on the structure itself?
Who holds the restriction? The Historical Commission?
I believe that is the proposal, yes. Dean, what do you think?
I don't know the answer to the question, to be honest with you. Again, I think it's an issue that could be brought up at the planning board hearing, or you could bring it up with town council before then and mention it at the hearing.
Mhm.
I assume town council's not going to be at that hearing. He doesn't typically go to those hearings.
Yeah, I was not planning to have him come, although I could always ask that he be there, but I was not planning to have him attend.
But I mean, this is just one of, I guess, several issues that the concerns that the commission has this morning with town council's edits. But you could clarify that with this point with town council, and if he says, he may have a good answer. He may have the answer that you posited. Or he may say, well, you could put in a line that says, in these circumstances, the historical commission shall release the restriction for recording.
Okay.
I mean, for clean title, you'd want to have something on record, I think. And I think Steve and Bob would probably agree with that.
Yeah. Well, again, that the process is confusing to me, that the planning board, as far as they're concerned, they have Ally's original version. All these things we've been going around with, town council's proposal as modified by our suggestions are all going to be on the table, I guess, for the planning board to figure out.
Will the planning board see the town council proposals, Ellie?
Yep. So my goal with this meeting today was to have the historical commission review town council's red line version. Any changes that we're proposing to make, I was going to create the new version with the commission, with the changes that we had discussed today, whether they be approval of town council's changes or not, as we've discussed. And I was going to send it with a memo to the planning board saying the historical commission on, the 15th of February reviewed town council's comments and made the following recommendations to make changes to the bylaw. And so that was the clean way that I thought we could handle these changes or proposed revisions to the bylaw, so that the planning board clearly understands the historical commission's stance on what recommendations town council had made to the bylaw.
I think that makes sense, that approach. Will they actually see the full town council version as well?
Yes,
I think that makes sense. Yeah. So,
well, Ally, just to try and clarify, then it's going to look like, if you go back to the first paragraph, the purpose paragraph where you had made some changes, you had town councils, and then you had our changes in blue or something or other. And Dean thought this was hard to read before. Good God.
well, you didn't have what I think she's saying, though. Sorry, Ellie, I didn't use you in the person here, but I think what Allie's, and again, I apologize, Bob, for being so active today, but I think what Ally is saying is that she's going to have a third document. They've got in front of them your original draft,
Right.
Ally's draft. Everybody's calling it Ally's draft. That's what you proposed. That's what's been noticed. If nothing else went before them, they have enough in front of them to pass a pretty good bylaw, and that's consistent with what you all want to do. They're also going to have town council's red line version. You have identified probably no more than a couple of places this morning, as I heard you. I mean, I had to interrupt for a while, so I'm not sure if you made any more comments, but I don't think there are any more than less than a handful of changes. In the first paragraph, you wanted the word architecturally significant removed. And you have some question about what the meaning is on the paragraph that I brought to your attention on termination, for clarification as to what he means, and also whether there should be some mechanism, or how do you deal with the fact that you've got a historical restriction on records. So I think Ally's talking about putting that into a short memo that says that, I'm not even sure, Ally, if you need to put in front of them a third version. I think if you just highlight the 3 or 4 areas where the commission today differs from town council. Is
I
that,
think she's got, isn't that the intended to be the yellow?
Yep, so I spoke with town council about this, and he felt that whatever changes the commission wanted to make, I would make them, and I would present a clean copy of the changes to the planning board so that they would have a clean copy of the proposal. I would obviously outline them in a memo as well so that everyone knows what changes the commission is recommending, so it's very, very clear. But he recommended having a clean copy as well so that the planning board understands that this is the verbiage that town council has suggested. The historical commission had reviewed it, made their own changes to it, and this is the clean version of the proposal right now. This, just so the historical commission understands, I know that this is getting a little muddy, I can tell, but the planning board during the public hearing process, this is the procedure that's outlined in Mass General Law. It is perfectly acceptable to make changes to the bylaw during the public hearing process. The planning board wants to hear comment on each of the proposed bylaws, not just the historical commission, but all of them. And they do make changes during the public hearing process. That's what's outlined and required in Mass General Law. So it is an acceptable thing for the planning board to do during the hearing. But as Dean said, it needs to be inside the scope of what was originally noticed in the public hearing notice, which town council has assured me that all of these changes are inside the scope of what the public hearing notice was originally noticed. So it's, again, to reiterate, it's perfectly acceptable for the historical commission to review these changes, make suggestions to the planning board, and the planning board will review them during the public hearing process.
Okay, so I think we've got, as Dean said, there are not a whole lot of changes. There's the first paragraph with the architecturally and change issued a grant, and then there's the zoning piece about changing the existing criteria, and then there's those last 2 paragraphs that I think we agreed to take that one, the first one of those out that he had proposed, the one that number 1 there, because that wasn't doing anything. And then the one up above is the one that we still got some doubts over whether to agree to his changes or send our original version. Does that seem to capture where we are?
I believe so. I just have a quick comment on the termination section that town council added. Again, when I discussed this with him, he said these are recommendations. These are his recommendations to the historic commission. We can take it or leave it. And I feel that if it is a little bit muddy about, is this really the intent or the original intent of the bylaw that the historic commission wanted to put forward, I would venture to guess that maybe we keep the original language in there. And I don't know how the commission feels about that, but from what I look, his changes are more, I think, more verbiage that he was trying to put forward instead of altering the intent of what the commission had stated. So that's my recommendation. But obviously it's up to you. And again, Dean, I know you don't want to comment as much as you have, but I would love to hear your comments on that as well. But
I think your point is well taken, Bob, if I may. And as I look at it this morning, as I said a little while ago, that first clause in his draft, in his red line version, which says that those flexibility incentives shall terminate, is probably his way of saying the same thing that you say when you say they have to bring it into compliance. And if he had felt that there was a substantive disagreement with what you said from what he's proposing, I think he would have had a side note that said your proposal is legally suspect. But he hasn't done that. And he's told Ally that in general, all of his changes are non-substantive. So, and the planning board's going to have his stuff in front of him, and there may be people on the planning board who will say, I like his better than the original draft. We should go with that, or whatever. Or some third party's going to offer something. So I think that the way Ally has outlined how to proceed is probably the way to go, is the way to go. And as I say, you've got the benefit of having your version in front of, that's what's in front of that's going to set the scope of what can be addressed at the planning board by the public. And you know, if somebody comes in and says, well, we should have this apply to, you know, a larger lot or whatever, that's not going to be permitted. Okay. So thank you.
Right. So as an example, Dean, what Bob Oliver had submitted to us would, for a potential revision to the bylaw, would definitely be outside the scope of the public hearing, because it reviews a completely different section of the bylaw. So that change would require a new public hearing by the planning board. But as I've said multiple times, what town council has proposed here is not outside of the scope of the public hearing.
Okay, I'm trying to bring closure to this. Any other comments before somebody hopefully makes a motion? My thinking is, Steve, go ahead.
Just quickly, I just want to make certain that Ally will in fact discuss the process for releasing the preservation restriction with town council, and have that information available to the hearing of the planning commission.
Yes, I will I have a note, and I will ask him that question for the planning board, and I will submit it to the planning board, his answer, his response, and also the historical commission as well.
As a consequence of that, I will make a motion, and I know what I want to accomplish. Help me with this, Bob, if you can. I guess to forward to the planning commission our comments regarding the proposed dimensional requirement historic preservation incentives, together with the comments of the town council.
So you want to forward the document with our proposed changes in it, which would not include this paragraph we've been talking about with the preservation restriction or the termination of rights, and that one with preservation restriction, and the other changes up front, and then that's it, I guess, right?
I think that covers it.
The changes that we have agreed on here, and the determination to keep some of the information that town council had modified. Does that capture it? Ally, you following this?
Yeah, I think so. So the only changes that we made, just to bring it back from town council, so we've accepted in essence all of town council's recommendations except the architecturally significant discussion here.
Right.
We've changed the word grant to the word grant from issue. We've chosen not to accept the changes in the regular findings that are already in our bylaw, so we will not include those changes. We've chosen to accept his recommendation of removing this paragraph here from the preservation restriction. And we've also chosen in this section to revert back to our original language that we had in this proposal. And then on top of that, I'll also ask town council for the deed restriction question. If that terminates, if there is damage, or destroy of the historical structure, does the deed restriction automatically terminate? How does that work? Did that capture it?
It does to me. Steve, is that your motion to do as Ally described?
Thank you, Raleigh. Appreciate it.
This is Don. I second the motion.
Okay, we'll do a roll call and see what happens. The vice chair approves. Steve,
I
Yeah.
unmuted.
Ben,
Yes,
Stephanie.
I'm going to abstain. I think we should keep the whole thing that Ally wrote and not change anything.
Well, I've already got that, but yeah, okay. Fair enough. Jane,
Yes,
Don,
Yes,
Janet,
Yes,
great. Okay. Hopefully Ally's able to synthesize this mess, which I didn't think was going to take quite so long.
Thank you very much.
2 hours,
I appreciate all of your hard work on this.
an hour and a half.
Okay, we have like 5 more things to do quickly. First on the agenda is the discussion of remote versus hybrid beyond March 1st. I think we've agreed, we agreed last time, Michelle, that March 1st was going to be remote.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. I note that in the little speech at the beginning, that the open meeting law provisions that were suspended ends April 1st. So I don't.
They have been extended to July 15th.
Oh, it was, okay, so.
Yes, just got that notice this morning.
Oh, all right. So the question is, what do we want to do on March 15th? Did we, Claire, I'm sorry, I'm losing it here. March 15th, do we make a decision on that already? That's going to be remote?
I don't believe you did. I think the only one as far as March 1st at my request, but I will
Right.
need to advertise the March 15th meeting by the end of this week. So we'll need to know what your preference is for that.
Right, okay. Well, we got March 15th, and then we're going to have to, at least on that day, probably make a decision about April 5th too. The question for the group is, do you want to keep on being remote or switch to hybrid starting March 15th or April 5th or whatever your pleasure may be?
Hybrid,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
hybrid. Steph,
Hybrid,
speak.
okay. Steve, your hand's up still, or,
Oh, it shouldn't be. I'm sorry. I'll take it down.
okay,
I
that's
have,
all right.
I have no preference.
I don't really,
Bob?
Jane, yes?
I might prefer hybrid on March 15th.
Okay,
I don't know whether the wound will be healed by then.
well, it seems to me that hybrid is the least intrusive in terms of personal needs or difficulties. You can, in a way, make your choice. You can come in, or you can stay remote. Does that make sense, at least, that we do that for the 15th and let's say April 5th at this point?
it's fine with me.
Fine with
Anybody
me.
It's okay with me?
This is Ben, I agree.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
Michelle, got
Bob.
that?
I
recorded?
didn't. I was just going to ask if you to repeat it.
Yeah, we're going to be, the decision at the moment is hybrid on the March 15th and April 5th.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm sure, if I could interrupt just 1 minute, I don't know that you're aware, but all the mask mandates have been lifted as well. So there'll be no masking required in the public meetings, in your meetings.
Okay.
So
I
not
did
sure
know
if that,
Was that the Board of Health meeting yesterday?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay.
I just got that notice this morning as well, so I don't know how that weighs in on your thoughts about meeting in person, any or all of you.
Well, any changes of thought that the person next to you might not be wearing a mask?
Well, everyone is entitled to wear a mask if that makes them more comfortable, of course, but there will be some that don't.
Understand that, but I might be sitting next to one of you people who doesn't wear a mask, so.
Yeah, that's the thing.
And I might be cautious about that.
Right.
Janet's been out hanging around with that Gary guy, so.
I know. I said he better not bring any germs home.
We still willing to do hybrid or remote? Your choice. If you're, I guess, if you're uncomfortable about the mask situation, you can be remote. So that's why I say it allows flexibility for all of us.
I say
What do
stay
you
with
think?
hybrid.
What do you think,
Okay.
Bob? Hybrid or to remote? I mean, what happens if everybody's remote? We say it's hybrid, but what happens if we all end up at home?
I'll be there.
The TV crew gets angry.
I'll be there.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable coming in and running the meeting without a mask?
If I did, I'd wear a mask. I mean, that's,
Yeah. Okay.
I have N95s. I'm not too worried about
Yeah,
it.
you're not worried. Okay.
Okay, Michelle, let's leave it at that. 15th and the 5th at the moment are hybrid.
Thank you very much.
Unless you get some kind of feedback from Dallas, et cetera, that they don't like that arrangement, but.
Okay.
Okay, preservation awards, anything new other than 4 nominations?
So Sandy is not here, so I can report back that of the 4 nominations received, the committee voted to present awards to 3 of the 4. The
Okay.
fourth was a touch complicated, so they did go with 3 of the 4.
Okay. Steve, any update on the cemetery situation?
Which one? Not with the funding. What I was doing was quickly terminated when they determined that the money was available anyway, so that we need not go to the CPC for that funding, CPC rather. But I haven't heard anything more about that. Perhaps Michelle knows more than I do, and I don't know if the little building in Seaside Cemetery is something we want to talk about now or sometime later in the meeting.
It's now or not this meeting, so. What would we need to talk about? That comes under, what was the resolution to that, Michelle? HBDC jurisdiction?
No, it's not HBDC. I talked with Sarah about it, and it's outside of their jurisdiction. It would fall to the Historical Commission. It's not noted on the agenda, but they did, the commission, the Cemetery Commission admin staff asked for a determination of age of the shed building in the Seaside Cemetery.
Okay, but that, Steve, that doesn't impact this Form E's, does it, or what?
I wouldn't think so. Well, I'm sure it would be part of the Form E is in the description of the cemetery. And yeah, I think it would affect the Form E if it were somehow removed or demolished.
But what we have now is a quote from Chartier.
Okay,
and-
going back to that.
And community development has agreed to figure out a way to fund it.
Yes.
My
There is
understanding
available
is
funding.
that-
Okay, so that's the answer to it, right? I mean,
Does this mean it's being withdrawn from CPA?
I don't think it ever went, did it?
Yes, it did.
No,
It did?
it was never submitted.
Well, wait a minute. There was one on this cemeteries having a study of them.
The completion of the Form E's, yes. or an update of the Form Es, or
Right.
no,
Update.
origination of the Form Es.
No, there was never a Form E
No.
done.
Well, if,
But
Michelle,
so
do you know whether there was a CPA grant?
there was
done?
not. No,
think so.
there were two. One was for the Nickerson property for National Register nomination, and the other was the update of the archaeological survey. Those are the two
Right.
items.
Yeah, okay, and that's the next two items on the
Yes.
agenda, which are taken care of, so.
Yes.
All right, I don't think there's any action we need to do then on the Form E part, except get it moving with community development. Okay, the demolition by neglect, I take it nothing's happened. South Chatham National Register District, Michelle got a letter yesterday, I guess, or a copy of a letter from Mass Historic to Eric Dre saying that they needed more information or a restructuring of the information that he already had. And I just saw Frank had sent an email to Eric Dre saying, how long do you think it's going to take, or something to that effect. So moving along, but very slowly. Under Chairman's report, current demolition delays. The only one that I know anything about is 322 Bridge Street. The delay expired last weekend. It's listed with the zoning board on February 24th. They plan, as they said, to tear down the two buildings. They're going to put two buildings up, both of which are closer to the abutter than the current buildings. The abutters have concerns, and we shall see, I guess. Administrative reviews, 935 Old Queen Anne Road. This is the building at the corner of Queen Anne and Sam Ryder. We've got the swimming pool in back there. We had a administrative review a couple of weeks ago about the clapboards versus the shingles, which we approved. This one is to add a little, an additional window on the sort of side rear of the building. It's rather hard to see where it is. Michelle, do you have a picture of that? Yeah. Michelle?
Should I keep
Yes.
my mouth shut?
I'm sorry. Did I miss the question? I'm sorry, Bob.
Yeah, do you have a picture of that, the 935 Queen Anne Road?
I do not. Let me see if I can pull one up. You're talking about the request for the window?
The window, yeah.
Okay, let me look into it. I thought I put one in your packet. I
Well,
apologize.
you did. I just wondered. I didn't. So everybody had a look at the picture of that, or any concerns about it? If not, we can accept a motion to ratify the determination made by Don and I and Sandy that it did not significantly impact the application. Any thoughts out there?
It's not gonna make any difference, Bob. It's already beyond. I mean, I walk by it all the time. It's beyond recognition.
Well,
It's
I'm
not
sure.
gonna resemble its former self. Let's put it that way.
Yep. Well, anyway, is that a motion to ratify the subcommittee?
Yes, it's a motion to ratify.
All right.
Let him put the window
All
in.
in favor of that? I'm in favor because I looked at it. Steve, we need your vote.
Yes.
Ben,
Yes.
Yes.
Stephanie,
Yes.
Jane,
Yes, but I
Don.
didn't get it in my packet.
I
and-
did not include it in everyone's packet. I just included it in Bob's, and I'm sorry, but I can't pull up the picture for some reason. I
That's all right.
apologize. I'll
Just
be
pull
better
the
prepared
picture.
next time.
No.
Bob, I'm assuming you seconded that motion as the chair, because I didn't hear anybody second it, so I think
Yes,
that
yes,
should be reflected
Thank you,
in
Dean.
minutes.
for Christina's help. Okay, so we've approved that. That is the last item on my agenda. Any other, call it old business or new business to bring up? Any other final motion?
I move to
Yes, a
adjourn.
motion to return. I don't know who won that race, but
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
One last vote. I say yes. Steve, you're yes.
Yes,
Ben,
Yes.
Beth,
Yes.
Jane,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Sandy, not Sandy, Janet.
Yes.
Thank you all. I was hoping to set a speed record this time. I did not. So
I don't think so.
Did a good job.
way off, way.